The elevator doors slid open like the gates of hell, revealing a marble-floored paradise that I had no business entering. 42 floors above the city streets, Sterling and Associates commanded a view that cost more per square foot than most people made in a year. But as I stepped onto that polished stone, my cheap shoes squeaking like dying mice, I wasn't thinking about the view. I was thinking about the interview that would change my life, though not in the way I expected. My name is Marcus Chen, and 11 months ago, I walked into the most humiliating 30 minutes of my life. What happened in that glass tower would teach me that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that morning when I stood in front of my bathroom mirror practicing handshakes with my own reflection, wearing a suit that smelled like someone else's dreams. The alarm clock screamed at 5:30 a.m., jolting me awake in my studio apartment that was smaller than some people's closets. 350 square feet of pure ambition, located in a neighborhood where the sirens were the soundtrack and the roaches paid rent just like everybody else. I'd been preparing for this interview for 3 weeks. Sterling and Associates wasn't just any consulting firm, they were the consulting firm. The kind of place where Fortune 500 CEOs went when they needed someone to tell them how to make their billions into more billions. The kind of place where junior associates drove BMWs and wore watches that cost more than my college tuition. The kind of place that could change everything. I pulled the suit from my closet, a charcoal gray number I'd found at Goodwill for $12.99. The fabric had that slightly rough texture that screamed discount rack, and no matter how much I'd tried to steam out the wrinkles, it still looked like it had been folded at the bottom of someone's suitcase for 6 months. But it was clean. It fit reasonably well, and it was all I had. The shoes were worse. Black pleather from Payless, marked down to $15 because they were the last pair in my size and had a small scuff on the left toe that no amount of polish could hide. The soles were so thin I could feel every crack in the sidewalk, and they squeaked when I walked on anything smoother than concrete. But I told myself it didn't matter. What mattered was what was in my head, not what was on my body. I had an MBA from State University. Not Harvard, not Wharton, but a real degree from a real school that I'd paid for with student loans that would follow me to my grave. I had 3 years of experience at Morrison & Associates, a mid-tier consulting firm where I'd learned the business from the ground up, working 14-hour days and weekend shifts while my classmates with better connections landed cushy jobs. At white shoe firms, I was smart, I was hungry, I was ready. I had no idea I was walking into an execution. The subway ride downtown took 45 minutes, giving me plenty of time to review my notes and practice my responses to likely interview questions. I'd researched Sterling and Associates until I could recite their client list from memory. I knew their revenue projections, their recent case studies, their corporate philosophy. I'd even found articles about their founder, Richard Sterling, and memorized his quotes about excellence in execution and delivering results that exceed expectations. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that none of it would matter. The Sterling building rose 60 floors into the Manhattan sky, all glass and steel and impossible angles that made you crane your neck just to see the top. The lobby was a cathedral of capitalism, with marble floors that reflected the light from crystal chandeliers and a reception desk that looked like it had been carved from a single block of obsidian. I announced myself to the receptionist, a woman in her mid-20s who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Her smile was professional but distant, the kind of expression you give to someone you're trying not to notice. Marcus Chen for Sterling and Associates, I said, trying to project confidence despite the fact that my voice cracked slightly on my own name. She glanced at me briefly, her eyes making a quick journey from my face to my suit to my shoes and back again. Something flickered across her expression, not quite disgust, but definitely not approval. 42nd floor, she said, handing me a visitor's badge. The elevators are to your right. The elevator ride felt like ascending to another planet. Each floor that passed was another step away from the world I knew, the world of cramped apartments and instant ramen dinners and shoes that squeaked when you walked. By the time I reached the 42nd floor, I felt like I was breathing different air. The Sterling and Associates reception area was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city that made you feel like you were flying. The furniture looked like it belonged in a museum, all clean lines and expensive. Fabrics and surfaces so polished you could see your reflection. Abstract art hung on the walls, the kind of paintings that cost more than most people's cars and were supposed to make you feel sophisticated for understanding them. The receptionist here was even more polished than the one downstairs. Mid-30s, perfectly styled blonde hair, wearing a dress that probably cost more than I made in a month. Her smile was warm and professional, but I caught her glance at my shoes when she thought I wasn't looking. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice carrying just a hint of what might have been pity. "They'll be with you shortly. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" "Water would be great," I said, settling into a chair that was probably worth more than my entire living room set. She brought me the water in a crystal glass, the kind you see in expensive restaurants. I held it carefully, terrified I might drop it and shatter something that cost more than my monthly rent. For 20 minutes, I sat in that reception area, watching important-looking people in expensive suits glide past like they owned the world. And maybe they did. Every conversation I overheard was about deals worth millions, clients with names I recognized from the business pages, problems that involved more money than I'd see in a lifetime. I tried to fit in, to look like I belonged, but I felt like a fraud. Every time someone walked by, I was convinced they could see right through me. See the cheap suit, the discount shoes, the bank account that had less than $1,000 in it. I was a pretender in a palace, and I was sure everyone knew. "It? Mr. Chen?" The receptionist's voice broke through my nervous spiral. "They're ready for you now." She led me down a hallway lined with photographs of Sterling and Associates' greatest triumphs, headlines from the Wall Street Journal and Forbes, pictures of Richard Sterling shaking hands with CEOs and politicians, awards and accolades that spoke of a company at the top of its game. The conference room was bigger than my entire apartment. A table that could seat 20 people dominated the center, its surface so polished I could see my reflection in it. The walls were floor to ceiling, glass offering a view that stretched to the horizon. This was where million-dollar deals were made, where the fate of Fortune 500 companies was decided, and sitting at the far end of that table, like judges at a tribunal, were the three men who would determine my future. Richard Sterling was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd built a consulting empire from nothing, 60-something years old, with silver hair that was styled just so, wearing a suit that had definitely been tailored on Savile Row. His tan spoke of weekends in the Hamptons and winter vacations in Aspen. When he smiled, it was the smile of a man who'd never heard the word no from anyone who mattered. To his left sat Brad Morrison, the head of client relations. Younger than Sterling, maybe mid-40s, with the kind of aggressive handsomeness that came from good genes and better personal trainers. His suit was navy blue and probably cost more than my car. He had the look of someone who'd never worked a day in his life, but had convinced the world he was indispensable. The third man was James Whitfield, the numbers guy, thin and pale, with wire-rimmed glasses and the nervous energy of someone who lived on caffeine and anxiety. His Rolex caught the afternoon light every time he moved his wrist, which he did frequently, like he wanted to make sure everyone noticed. "Marcus," Sterling said, gesturing to a chair that seemed miles away from where they sat. "Good to meet you. Please have a seat." I walked the length of that table, my cheap shoes squeaking against the polished floor with each step. The sound echoed in the vast room like gunshots, and I was convinced everyone could hear it. When I finally reached the chair, I sat down carefully, afraid that even the furniture could sense I didn't belong. "So," Sterling continued, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of a man who owned the world, "tell us about yourself." I launched into the speech I'd practiced 100 times in my bathroom mirror. I talked about my education, my experience at Morrison & Associates, my passion for strategic consulting and helping companies achieve their goals. I mentioned specific case studies I'd worked on, problems I'd solved, results I'd delivered. But As I spoke, I could see their attention drifting. Sterling was looking out the window at the city below. Morrison was checking his phone, not even trying to hide it. Whitfield was making notes, but I had the sinking feeling they weren't about anything I was saying. When I finished, there was a long pause. Sterling looked back at me like he'd forgotten I was there. "That's interesting," he said finally, and the way he said it made my blood run cold. "But you have to understand, Marcus, we're not just looking for qualifications here." Morrison leaned forward, his smile sharp as a knife. "Our clients have certain expectations. When they walk through these doors, they expect to see success. They expect to see people who look like they belong in their world. Image is everything in this business," Whitfield added, his voice thin and reedy. "Our clients are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, heads of state, people who control billions of dollars. They need to have confidence in us from the moment they meet us." Sterling nodded slowly, his eyes making a deliberate journey from my face to my suit to my shoes and back again. "It's not just about what you know, Marcus. It's about what you project, and what you're projecting right now." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could feel my face burning with shame and anger and humiliation all mixed together into something that tasted like bile in the back of my throat. Morrison actually laughed, a short, sharp sound that cut through the quiet like a blade. "I mean, look, we're sure you're smart enough. Your resume isn't terrible, but this isn't about intelligence. This is about presence, about fitting in with the kind of people who can afford our services. Our clients expect a certain standard," Sterling said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "When Hartman Industries walks in here, they need to see someone who looks like they could walk into any boardroom in America and belong there. When Blackstone Capital calls, they need to talk to someone who sounds like success." He paused, letting his words sink in like poison. "And frankly, Marcus, that's not what we're seeing here." The words hit me like physical blows. Each one carefully chosen, precisely delivered, designed to make me understand exactly how far I was from their world and how impossible it would be for me to bridge that gap. Whitfield cleared his throat. "It's nothing personal, you understand? It's just business." "Business," I repeated, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. "Exactly," Morrison said, already standing up. "We appreciate you coming in, Marcus. We really do. But we're looking for someone who fits our image, someone who can walk into a room and command respect without saying a word." Sterling was gathering his papers, clearly ready to move on to more important matters. "We'll be in touch," he said, though we all knew he wouldn't be. I sat there for a moment, frozen in that expensive chair, watching these three men dismiss me like I was nothing, like all my education, all my experience, all my dreams and ambitions meant less than the price tag on my shoes. Finally, I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me. "Thank you for your time," I managed to say, though the words felt like glass in my throat. Morrison was already heading for the door. "Good luck with your search," he called over his shoulder, not even bothering to turn around. Sterling didn't say anything at all. I walked back down that hallway, past the photographs of success and achievement, past the receptionist who smiled at me with what I now realized was pity, into the elevator that carried me down from their glass tower back to the real world. But I didn't leave the building. Something inside me, call it pride, call it stubbornness, call it pure rage, wouldn't let me walk away, not yet, not like this. Instead, I took the elevator down to the ground floor and found the coffee shop tucked into the corner of the lobby. It was the kind of place that served overpriced lattes to overworked office drones, with small tables scattered around a space that was clearly designed to encourage quick consumption and faster turnover. I bought a black coffee with the last $5 in my wallet and chose a table near the back, close to where the building's ventilation system hummed. Behind a decorative grate, the sound was annoying at first, like sitting next to an air conditioner that needed repair, but then I started to hear voices. The building was old, constructed in the 1970s when environmental regulations were more like suggestions and energy. Efficiency was an afterthought. The ventilation system was a maze of ducts and airways that connected every floor, and sound traveled through it like a highway. And Sterling and Associates, in their arrogance and their certainty that they were untouchable, had apparently never considered that their private conversations might not be as private as they thought. Jesus, did you see those shoes? Morrison's voice drifted down through the ducts, muffled but clearly audible. I thought he was going to ask us for spare change. Laughter echoed through the metal airways. Sterling's voice. The suit was even worse. Where do you even buy something like that? Walmart? The resume wasn't completely terrible, Whitfield said. State University isn't Harvard, but it's not a community college either. Doesn't matter, Sterling replied. You put him in front of Hartman Industries or Blackstone Capital, and they'll think we're running a charity. Image is everything, gentlemen. Everything. I pulled out a napkin and started writing. Names, comments, everything I could catch from their conversation as it filtered down through 42 floors of office building. But then something changed. The laughter stopped. The casual cruelty gave way to something else entirely. Speaking of Hartman, Morrison said, his voice suddenly tense, we need to talk about the quarterly projections. What about them? Sterling asked. They're pulling out. The silence that followed was deafening, even filtered through layers of steel and concrete. What do you mean pulling out? Sterling's voice had lost all its earlier confidence. I got the call this morning, Morrison said. They're not happy with the numbers we gave them. Apparently our conservative estimates were off by about 40%. They're calling it gross negligence. How the hell were we off by 40%? Whitfield demanded. Because we didn't do the actual research, Morrison snapped. We used the interns' projections and dressed them up with fancy charts and graphs. You remember? The kid who'd never done market analysis before in his life? More silence. I wrote faster, my pen racing across napkin after napkin. This is bad, Sterling said finally. Hartman Industries is our biggest client. They represent 30% of our revenue. It gets worse, Morrison continued. They're not just leaving. They're talking about a lawsuit. They claim our negligent advice cost them over $2 million in bad investments. Can they prove that? Whitfield asked. Probably. The paper trail leads right back to our projections. And since we billed them for senior associate work while having an intern do the actual analysis… Shit. Sterling's voice was quiet, defeated. What about Blackstone? Also in jeopardy, Morrison said. They found out we've been billing them for senior associate hours while having interns do the actual work. Apparently, one of the kids got drunk at some bar and started bragging about working on major corporate accounts. Word got back to Blackstone's legal department. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Sterling and Associates, the prestigious consulting firm that was too good for someone like me, was running their business like a diploma mill. They were charging Fortune 500 companies premium rates for work done by unpaid interns. How much are we talking about in terms of exposure? Sterling asked. If both clients sue, we could be looking at 10, maybe 15 million in damages, Whitfield said. And that's just from these two. If word gets out about our practices, every client we've ever had might start asking questions. We're hemorrhaging money, Morrison added. The office lease alone is killing us. What are we paying for this space? $12,000 a month? 15, Whitfield corrected, plus utilities, plus the parking garage, plus the expense accounts. We're spending more on image than we're bringing in. What about the Maserati payments? Sterling asked. Those are personal expenses, Morrison protested. That the company is covering as business development, Whitfield shot back. Along with your boat loan and Sterling's country club membership, the IRS is going to have a field day when they audit us. When they audit us? Sterling's voice pitched higher. You think it's inevitable? With the kind of losses we're showing? Yeah, I think it's inevitable. I sat in that coffee shop for 6 hours, listening to the slow-motion collapse of Sterling and Associates. Their client list was shrinking. Their reputation was built on smoke and mirrors. Their financial situation was held together with creative, accounting, and sheer desperation. The prestigious consulting firm that had rejected me for not fitting their image was dying from the inside, killed by the very arrogance and superficiality that had made them dismiss me. "We need options," Sterling said as the afternoon wore on and their situation became clearer. "What are our alternatives?" "We could try to find new clients," Morrison suggested half-heartedly. "With what reputation? Word travels fast in this business. If Hartman and Blackstone both drop us and sue us, no Fortune 500 company will touch us." "We could downsize," Whitfield offered. "Move to cheaper offices, cut the expense accounts, actually start doing the work ourselves instead of farming it out to interns." Sterling laughed bitterly. "And destroy everything we've built? This company is about prestige, about image. You move us to some strip mall office in Queens, and we might as well be selling insurance." "Then what do you suggest?" Morrison demanded. The silence stretched for long minutes. When Sterling finally spoke, his voice was quiet, calculating. "We find a buyer," he said. "Someone to take this whole mess off our hands before the creditors come calling." "Who's going to want to buy a company that's about to be sued into oblivion?" Whitfield asked. "Someone who doesn't know better," Sterling replied. "We clean up the books, hide the legal problems, make everything look profitable and stable. Then, we find some sucker who's impressed by the office space and the client list and doesn't dig too deep into the actual financials. That's fraud," Whitfield said quietly. "That's business," Sterling corrected. "We're not lying about anything. We're just presenting the information in the most favorable light possible. And if the buyer finds out later, that's their problem. Caveat emptor and all that. I sat in that coffee shop until closing time, filling napkin after napkin with notes. Names, dates, financial figures, legal problems, ethical violations, everything. I needed to understand exactly how rotten Sterling and Associates really was. But more than that, I began to see an opportunity. They were looking for a sucker, someone desperate enough to buy a failing business, someone who didn't look too closely at the books, someone who would pay premium price for what appeared to be a successful consulting firm. They had no idea they'd just found their worst nightmare. As I finally gathered my napkins full of notes and prepared to leave, I caught one last exchange from the ventilation system. "The kid today?" Morrison said. "The one with the cheap suit." "What about him?" Sterling asked. "Maybe we should have been nicer. I mean, if we're really going out of business, what did it matter?" Sterling's laugh was cold and empty. "Please. That kid would never amount to anything. Did you see those shoes? Some people are just born to be employees, Brad. They don't have what it takes to run with the big dogs." "Image is everything," Whitfield agreed. "And his image was all wrong." I smiled as I walked out of that coffee shop, clutching my napkins full of secrets. They thought they knew me. They thought they had me figured out based on the price of my suit and the sound of my shoes on their marble floors. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. Over the next 11 months, I would use every piece of information I'd gathered, every contact I'd made, every lesson I'd learned from their rejection, to systematically acquire everything they'd built, not through luck or inheritance or connections, but through pure intelligence, relentless preparation, and the kind of hunger that only comes from being told you'll never amount to anything. They'd rejected me because I didn't fit their image of success. Soon, I would show them what real success looked like. The elevator doors closed behind me as I left the Sterling building that day, but I wasn't leaving forever. I was leaving to prepare, to plan, to become everything they'd said could never be, and when I came back, I would own them all.